The scratching started in the walls first. Then came the voices, whispers that seemed to seep through the very foundation of homes built on land that once belonged to the Bell family. For nearly 2 centuries, residents of Robertson County, Tennessee, have reported experiences they cannot explain. Furniture moves on its own. Children wake screaming about the old woman at the foot of their beds. Animals refuse to enter certain rooms. Local historians have documented over 300 separate incidents since 1821, each one somehow connected to a curse spoken by a dying farmer. The question isn't whether something lingers in these hills. The question is whether it ever truly left. In the autumn of 1817, a wealthy farmer named John Bell discovered something wrong with his crops. The corn in his northern field had developed strange growths. The stalks were twisted and blackened as if touched by disease, but it wasn't blight. The stalks bore an unnatural quality. They were bent into shapes that seemed almost on purpose. Bell was a practical man. He was a Baptist deacon respected throughout Robertson County for his level head and honest dealings. He'd carved out a successful farm from the Tennessee wilderness. He raised his wife Lucy and their 9 children in a solid 2-story house near the Red River. When Bell walked through the corrupted corn, he saw something moving between the rows. At first he thought it was a dog, but the creature's proportions were all wrong. It had the body of a large hound, but the head resembled something else entirely. Rabbit ears perhaps, or those of a deer. The thing watched him with what he would later describe as human intelligence. Then it vanished into the tree line. Bell said nothing to his family that evening. He convinced himself the failing light had played tricks on his eyes. But the incidents did not stop. Within days, his children began complaining of sounds in the night, scratching along the outside walls, the dragging of chains across the roof, bed covers yanked away in the darkness. The youngest daughter, Betsy, woke the household with screams. Something unseen had slapped her face hard enough to leave marks. John Bell could no longer dismiss these events as imagination or coincidence. Something had taken an interest in his family, and that interest felt deeply wrong. The Bell children each experienced the strange events differently. The oldest son, Jesse, reported seeing shadows that moved against the light source. They defied natural physics. His brother John Jr. heard breathing in empty rooms, the sound of lungs working steadily in the darkness. Drowry, another son, watched his bedroom door open and close repeatedly one night. The latch lifted by itself while he sat frozen in his bed. The younger children refused to sleep alone. They crowded into shared rooms despite their parents' attempts to maintain normal routines. Lucy Bell tried to explain the disturbances at first. She blamed the wind for the noises. She said the shadows came from candlelight playing tricks. She told herself that Betsy had simply fallen, that the marks on her face came from hitting the bedpost. But Lucy was a sharp woman. She could not ignore the evidence piling up around her. Objects moved when no one was nearby. The family Bible opened to specific passages overnight, always verses about judgment and punishment. The temperature would drop in certain rooms without explanation. Frost formed on the inside of windows even during mild weather. The strange events grew worse throughout 1818. Visitors to the Bell home reported hearing a female voice, but no woman was present. The voice spoke in whispers at first, barely audible, but it grew stronger with each passing week. It sang hymns. It quoted scripture. It also cursed with language so vile that Bell refused to repeat it in the presence of his wife. The entity seemed to know private details about every person who entered the house. It revealed secrets that should have remained buried. Neighbors began referring to it as Kate, though no one could say why that name felt appropriate. Word of the hauntings spread throughout Robertson County despite the Bell family's attempts to keep quiet. John Bell was a proud man who hated appearing foolish or weak. He first forbade his family from discussing the incidents with outsiders, but the strange events could not be hidden. Visitors experienced the disturbances firsthand. The scratching sounds were audible from outside the house. The voice grew bold enough to speak even when strangers were present. By early 1819, the Bell Witch had become the main topic of conversation in every general store and church gathering for miles around. Some neighbors offered help, others kept their distance. They feared being touched by whatever evil had attached itself to the Bell family. A few suggested the family had somehow brought this upon themselves. Though they could not explain what wrongdoing would deserve such torture, John Bell talked with his minister. The minister attempted prayers and blessings that had no effect. The minister reported feeling a heavy presence in the house, as if something invisible pressed against him, making it difficult to breathe. By 1819, the disturbances had become violent. John Bell suffered mysterious attacks that left him temporarily unable to move. His face twisted, his tongue swelled. The voice, now strong enough to hold conversations, claimed responsibility. It called itself a spirit. It said it had been disturbed and would have satisfaction. Some who heard it believed the voice belonged to Kate Batts. She was a neighbor Bell had argued with over a land dispute years earlier. Kate Batts was known in the community as a difficult woman, quick to anger, rumored to possess knowledge of folk magic passed down from her grandmother. The dispute between John Bell and Kate Batts had happened in 1813, 4 years before the haunting began. Bell had purchased a piece of land that bordered Batts' property. A disagreement arose over the exact boundary line. The matter went before a local judge. The judge ruled in Bell's favor. Kate Batts reportedly left the hearing muttering threats. Witnesses disagreed on her exact words. Some claimed she said Bell would live to regret crossing her. Others remembered her saying that some debts take years to collect. But Kate Batts was very much alive. And the voice claimed to be something else entirely. It said it was a spirit who had been disturbed from rest, though it never explained how or why. It showed knowledge of events happening miles away. It accurately described conversations and activities it could not possibly have witnessed. It predicted weather patterns. It predicted the outcomes of business deals. Most unsettling of all, it predicted that John Bell would not live to see another year. The entity displayed abilities that defied logical explanation. It could make itself heard in multiple rooms at once, having conversations with different family members at the same time. It moved objects with precision, placing them in specific locations as if following some unknowable logic. It knew when visitors were approaching the house before they came into view. It announced their arrival by name. It revealed information about people's pasts that only they knew, secrets shared with no one. James Johnston, a neighbor and friend of the Bell family, documented many of these incidents in a journal. The journal was later preserved by the Tennessee Historical Society. Johnston described an evening when the entity engaged in a religious debate with a visiting minister. It cited scripture with perfect accuracy. It showed knowledge of ancient Greek and Hebrew that few educated men of that era possessed. The entity argued points of faith with such skill that the minister left shaken. He questioned whether he had just debated with a demon. The entity's focus on Bell became an obsession. It tormented him without mercy, striking him with invisible blows that left bruises and kept him bedridden for days. Doctors could find no physical cause for his worsening condition. His face would swell without explanation. His tongue would twist in his mouth. Speech became impossible. The attacks grew more frequent as 1820 went on. Bell's health declined steadily, despite the efforts of physicians who traveled from Nashville to examine him. One physician, Dr. George Hobson, attempted to document Bell's symptoms with scientific care. He noted changes in Bell's pulse that matched with the entity's vocal activity. When the voice spoke, Bell's heartbeat became irregular. His blood pressure dropped in ways that could be measured. Hobson thought some form of mental influence might be at work, but he could not explain the physical signs. He observed bruises forming on Bell's skin in real time during one attack. He watched as dark marks appeared without any visible cause. Bell's decline affected the entire household. Lucy grew increasingly worried, unable to protect her husband from an enemy she could not see or fight. The children watched their father waste away, powerless to step in. Betsy, who remained a frequent target of the entity's attention, began showing signs of severe stress. She lost weight. Her hair started falling out. She developed a stutter that took months to overcome. The entity seemed to take special interest in Betsy's romantic life. When she became engaged to a young man named Joshua Gardner, the voice expressed violent opposition. It tormented Gardner whenever he visited, throwing objects at him, filling the house with accusations about his character. The voice claimed Gardner was unworthy of Betsy, that he would bring her nothing but misery. The harassment became so intense that Betsy eventually broke off the engagement in 1821. She hoped to end the entity's fixation on her, but ending the engagement did not stop the attacks on John Bell. If anything, they got worse. The voice declared that Bell's time was running out, that justice would soon be served. It sang cheerful songs about death and punishment. It described Bell's funeral in advance, predicting who would attend and what the weather would be like. The family lived in a state of constant dread, watching Bell fade, knowing they could do nothing to save him. On the morning of December 19th, 1820, Lucy Bell found her husband unconscious in his bed. A small vial sat on the nightstand, filled with a dark liquid no one in the household recognized. When the doctor arrived, he attempted to wake Bell but failed. The voice spoke then, filling the room with laughter. It claimed to have poisoned John Bell, replacing his medicine with something from that mysterious vial. The doctor tested the liquid on the family cat. The animal shook and died within minutes. John Bell never woke up. He died the following day while the voice sang cheerful songs throughout the house. At his funeral, the entity's laughter echoed across the cemetery, audible to every mourner present. It had made good on its promise. But the spirit's work was not finished. Before it finally fell silent in 1821, it spoke a prophecy. It said it would return in 107 years. It said the Bell blood would know no peace. It said the land itself would remember what had been done. The funeral drew a large crowd despite winter weather. People came from across Robertson County and beyond, some to pay respects, others simply curious about the famous haunting. Reverend James Gunn delivered the eulogy, but his words were repeatedly interrupted by the voice making mocking comments. Several mourners later reported that the entity sang a drinking song as the coffin was lowered into the ground, a final act of disrespect that left the gathered crowd in stunned silence. After John Bell's death, the entity's activity decreased, but did not stop right away. It continued speaking to family members for several more months, though less frequently and with less hostility. It claimed to be satisfied now that Bell had been punished. When asked what crime Bell had committed to deserve such treatment, the voice gave vague answers about debts and justice. It suggested that Bell knew what he had done, even if others did not. In April 1821, the voice announced it would be leaving. It said it was going away for a long time, but promised to return. It gave the specific time frame of 107 years, stating that in 1928, the Bell family would know its presence again. Then, during a family dinner, the voice spoke its final words. It said goodbye to Lucy and the children by name. It wished them well. Then something that sounded like a cannonball rolled down the chimney and exploded in the fireplace, sending smoke throughout the house. When the smoke cleared, the voice was gone. For decades, the Bell farm stood empty. Local families refused to purchase the property, despite its rich soil and good water access. Those who did attempt to settle there never lasted long. The Harrisons bought the land in 1842 and left within 6 months. They reported the same strange events the Bells had endured: scratching in the walls, phantom voices. Their daughter claimed something invisible pushed her down the stairs, breaking her arm. The Harrisons left Tennessee entirely, heading west to Missouri, where they hoped whatever haunted that ground could not follow. In 1866, a family named Patterson moved into the old Bell house. It had fallen into serious disrepair. Michael Patterson was a Union veteran. He'd seen enough horror during the war that ghost stories didn't frighten him. He brought his wife Sarah and their 3 sons to Robertson County with plans to restore the property. They lasted 11 days. Sarah Patterson kept a diary, portions of which were later donated to the Tennessee State Library. Her entries from that brief stay make for disturbing reading. She wrote about doors that would not stay closed, no matter how firmly latched, about the smell of rot that filled certain rooms despite thorough cleaning, about her eldest son, James, who began speaking to someone who wasn't there. When Sarah asked who he was talking to, James said it was the old woman who lived in the chimney. He described her in detail: white hair hanging in tangles, a face marked by burns, eyes that reflected light like an animal's. Sarah found James one morning standing in the yard, staring at the house with tears streaming down his face. He told her the old woman said they had to leave, or something bad would happen to his brothers. The Pattersons left that afternoon. Michael tried to convince Sarah it was just the boy's imagination running wild in an unfamiliar place. But Sarah had heard things too. Voices in the cellar speaking words she couldn't quite make out. Footsteps crossing the upstairs floor when everyone was accounted for downstairs. The sound of something large moving through the walls. She refused to spend another night under that roof. Michael finally agreed. Sarah's diary contained one final entry about the property, written weeks later from their new home in Kentucky. She described waking from nightmares in which the burned woman from James's description stood at the foot of her bed. Repeating a phrase Sarah could not understand, the nightmares continued for 6 months before finally stopping. The house stood empty again until 1879, when it was purchased by a timber company and torn down. Workers reported difficulties during the dismantling process. Tools would vanish and reappear in odd locations. Several men claimed to see a woman watching from the tree line, but when they approached, no one was there. The foreman, a man named Dutch Morris, told the local newspaper that progress was slowed by what he called an unnatural feeling. It made his crew reluctant to work. He said it felt like the house didn't want to come down, that it was fighting them somehow. Morris documented several specific incidents in his work logs. On 3 separate occasions, supporting beams collapsed without clear cause, nearly injuring workers. Nails would work themselves loose overnight, requiring crews to repeat previous days' work. One worker named Thomas Reed reported that while alone in the upper floor, he heard a woman's voice tell him to leave. Reed was known as a steady, reliable man not given to wild stories. He quit the job the following day. He refused to return regardless of pay offered. Once the structure was finally destroyed, the company planted the land with corn. The crop failed 3 years in a row. Stalks grew twisted and blackened, exactly as John Bell had described decades earlier. The timber company sold the property at a loss in 1883. For the next 40 years, the land changed hands repeatedly. No one could make it produce. No one could build successfully on it. Local farmers began calling it the Bell Witch Ground, and the name stuck. Between 1883 and 1920, the property had 7 different owners. Each attempted to farm or develop the land. Each failed. Cattle brought onto the property became upset and refused to graze in certain areas. Horses would not cross specific boundaries no matter how experienced the rider. Wells dug on the property yielded water that smelled of sulfur and left a black residue. Construction projects ran into unexpected difficulties, from tools breaking to workers falling ill. One owner, a man named Robert Kirkland, attempted to burn the overgrown vegetation and start fresh in 1897. The fire he set burned in a perfect circle, stopping at an invisible boundary as if hitting a wall. The unburned vegetation remained lush and green, while everything within the circle turned to ash. Kirkland sold the property within the month, telling neighbors he wanted nothing more to do with cursed ground. Then, in 1928, something unexpected happened. The entity had promised to return in 107 years, and 1928 marked exactly that span from 1821. A farmer named Charles Porter claimed to have encountered something at the old Bell property while searching for lost cattle. He described seeing a woman in old-fashioned dress standing near where the Bell house once stood. When he called out to her, she turned and smiled. But her face was wrong somehow. Porter couldn't put into words exactly what disturbed him about her appearance, only that it didn't look quite human. The woman spoke a single sentence before vanishing. She said the Bells would pay for what they had done. Porter reported the incident to the county sheriff. The sheriff investigated but found no evidence of trespassers. The sheriff's report noted unusual disturbances at the site. His dog refused to approach a specific area, cowering and whining instead. The temperature seemed notably colder near where the house had stood, even though the day was warm. The sheriff admitted feeling uncomfortable during the investigation, experiencing what he described as a pressure in his chest that made breathing difficult. Porter's experience was dismissed as a tall tale until other incidents began piling up. In 1929, a descendant of Betsy Bell named Margaret Foster reported strange events in her Nashville home. Events identical to what her great-great-aunt had endured. Scratching in the walls, phantom slaps that left marks, a voice that knew things it shouldn't. Margaret contacted a local minister who attempted to bless the house. During the blessing, the voice laughed. It said the Bell blood carried the curse wherever it went. The odd happenings stopped only after Margaret moved out and sold the property. Margaret's ordeal lasted 3 months. She documented incidents in letters to her sister, letters that were later donated to the Tennessee State Museum. The letters describe growing strange events that began with minor disturbances and became increasingly aggressive. Objects flew across rooms, doors slammed with enough force to crack frames. The voice grew from whispers to shouts, filling the house with accusations Margaret did not understand. Throughout the 1930s and 1940s, other Bell descendants reported similar experiences. The strange events seemed to follow bloodlines rather than locations. A great-grandson living in Kentucky woke to find his bedroom furniture rearranged every morning for a solid week. A great-great-granddaughter in Alabama watched her kitchen cabinets open and close by themselves. A female voice hummed a song popular in the early 1800s. The pattern was clear. Something was tracking the Bell family across multiple states and generations. Thomas Bell, a descendant living in Virginia, experienced strange events in 1936 that nearly destroyed his marriage. His wife Ellen reported hearing him call her name from various rooms in their house. But when she responded, Thomas would be elsewhere. The voice copied Thomas perfectly, luring Ellen into empty rooms where she would hear laughter. Ellen began to doubt her sanity until Thomas heard it too, his own voice calling out when his mouth was closed. They talked with a doctor who found nothing physically wrong with either of them. The incident stopped when they moved to a different house, but the experience left both deeply shaken. In 1951, a researcher named Edwin Broward documented 37 separate incidents involving Bell descendants. His interviews revealed common elements. The voice was always female. It knew family secrets. It seemed particularly interested in causing fear rather than physical harm. Though violent incidents were not uncommon, Broward thought the curse operated like a sickness, passed down through blood rather than tied to any specific place. His work was published in a small journal on folklore, but gained little attention outside academic circles. Broward's approach was careful for the time. He conducted in-person interviews with each family member. He verified their family tree through records. He documented supporting evidence where available. He noted that many descendants were unaware of their connection to the Bell family until strange events forced them to investigate their ancestry. This pattern suggested the haunting was not the result of suggestion or expectation, but something genuinely tracking bloodlines. The Robertson County property itself continued to generate reports. In 1966, a group of teenagers held a gathering at the site where the Bell house had stood. They attempted to contact spirits. 3 of them, later required hospital care for what doctors called severe mental distress. One girl, Patricia Reynolds, refused to speak for 2 weeks after the incident. When she finally did, she would only say that something came when they called, and it wore Betsy Bell's face. Patricia's parents moved the family to Florida shortly after her release from the hospital. Friends reported that Patricia never fully recovered, jumping at shadows, refusing to sleep with the lights off for the rest of her life. The other 2 teenagers hospitalized after the spirit contact, David Marsh and Jennifer Cole, experienced different symptoms. David developed a stutter and night terrors that persisted for years. Jennifer became convinced that something followed her home from the Bell property. She reported hearing footsteps in her house, seeing shadows move independently of light sources. Both teenagers eventually moved away from Tennessee, hoping distance would end their connection to whatever they had encountered. Modern paranormal investigators have conducted numerous studies of the Bell Witch Cave, a limestone cavern on the original property where the entity reportedly spent time. The cave draws tourists and ghost hunters from across the country. Many visitors report equipment failures. Cameras fail. Audio recorders pick up voices that weren't audible during recording. Temperature drops occur in specific locations with no natural explanation. Some visitors report feeling watched or experiencing sudden, overwhelming fear that forces them to leave. The cave system extends for several hundred feet beneath the property. Natural formations create chambers and passages. They were reportedly used by Native Americans centuries before European settlement. Some researchers believe the cave's history comes before the Bell haunting, that it may have been considered sacred or dangerous by indigenous peoples. Local Cherokee legends speak of spirits dwelling in caves throughout the region, beings that should not be disturbed. In 1993, a paranormal research team from Vanderbilt University conducted a 3-day investigation of the cave. Their findings were not definitive, but intriguing. Electromagnetic field readings spiked in areas where historical accounts placed the entity's activity. Thermal imaging revealed cold spots that moved independently of air currents. Most striking was an audio recording made on the second night. A female voice, clear and distinct, asked why they had come. When team leader Dr. Helen Morrison replied, the voice said the Bells still owed a debt. Dr. Morrison's team included a rock expert, a physicist, and 2 psychology researchers. They approached the investigation with scientific doubt, but left with questions they could not answer. The physicist, Dr. Raymond Cole, detected energy changes in the cave that did not match any known natural occurrences. The patterns suggested intelligence, or at least purpose, behind the changes, as if something was responding to the team's presence. The most recent documented incident involving the Bell curse occurred in 2003. A woman named Diane Sullivan traced her ancestry back to Lucy Bell's sister. Diane had no knowledge of the Bell Witch story until strange events began in her home in Memphis. It started with whispers she heard while falling asleep. Then came the physical disturbances. Objects moved when she wasn't looking. Her young daughter began having nightmares about a burned woman who wanted something. Diane researched her family history and discovered her connection to the Bells. She reached out to a local paranormal investigator who had studied the Bell Witch case. Together they attempted to document the activity. They recorded numerous oddities, voices in empty rooms, shadows that moved against the light. On 2 occasions, Diane's daughter's bedroom door locked from the inside while the child was not in the room. When they finally managed to force it open, they found the girl's toys arranged in a circle around a crude symbol scratched into the floor. Neither Diane nor her daughter recognized the symbol, but the investigator identified it as a folk magic sign used in the early 19th century, one associated with binding rituals. The activity stopped when Diane moved to a different state, but she reported feeling as if something followed her, not constantly present, but checking in from time to time. She described it as a pressure, a sense of being observed that came and went without warning. Her daughter continued having nightmares well into her teenage years, always featuring the same burned woman who said the family owed her something. Diane's investigator, a man named Robert Hayes, published a detailed report of the case in 2005. Hayes had spent 15 years researching the Bell Witch and related events. He noted that Diane's case fit a pattern he had observed in other Bell descendants. The activity typically began with subtle disturbances. It grew worse over a period of weeks or months, then ceased either when the person moved or acknowledged their family connection. Hayes thought the entity was making its presence known, reminding each generation that the curse remained active. Folklorists and historians have debated the Bell Witch case for nearly 2 centuries. Doubters point to the lack of physical evidence and the story's evolution through retelling. They suggest mass hysteria, explainable by the isolated nature of frontier life and the superstitious beliefs common in early 19th century rural Tennessee. They note that many details were not documented until decades after the events, allowing for exaggeration and distortion. Dr. Patricia Ewing, a folklore professor at the University of Tennessee, has written extensively about the Bell Witch as a cultural occurrence. She argues that the story serves a social function, providing a shared narrative that binds the community together. Ewing points out that similar haunting stories exist in many cultures, often emerging in times of social stress or change. She does not dismiss the experiences people report, but suggests they may have mental rather than supernatural origins. But believers counter with the sheer number of witnesses and the consistency of accounts across generations. They point to the documented incidents involving Bell descendants, many of whom had no knowledge of the family history until strange events forced them to investigate. They note the strange failures of crops and construction projects on the original property, difficulties that defy logical explanation. They reference the audio and video evidence collected by modern investigators, none of it final proof, but all of it suggestive. The Robertson County Historical Society maintains files on the Bell Witch case, updated regularly with new reports. Local residents have mixed feelings about the attention the story brings. Tourism provides economic benefits, but many locals genuinely believe something evil lingers in those hills. They speak carefully about the entity, avoiding mockery or disrespect. Some still follow old customs meant to ward off the Bell Witch's attention: salt lines across thresholds, iron nails above doorways, prayers spoken at sunset. In 2019, a documentary crew attempted to film overnight in the Bell Witch cave. They obtained permission from the property owner and set up equipment throughout the cavern system. The filming had to be abandoned after their sound technician, Marcus Webb, experienced what he described as a complete breakdown. Webb was a doubter with 15 years of experience on paranormal television shows. He emerged from the cave after midnight in a state of severe distress. He told the crew something had touched his face in the darkness. When he turned on his light, he saw a woman standing close enough to touch. She had burns covering her face and hands. She spoke directly to him, saying he didn't belong here, that he should leave before he learned what the Bells had learned. Webb refused to return to the cave. He quit the production and left Tennessee the following day. The documentary was never completed. The footage from that night has never been released, though rumors persist that it captured something the crew deemed too disturbing to show. The production company dissolved shortly after, citing creative differences. But crew members have hinted in online forums that the Tennessee shoot fundamentally changed their perspective on the paranormal. The production's director, Lisa Morales, gave a single interview about the incident to a paranormal podcast in 2020. She confirmed that Webb had encountered something in the cave, but declined to provide details. She stated that the footage they captured raised questions she could not answer with conventional explanations. Morales said the experience convinced her that some places retain echoes of traumatic events, that the Bell Witch Cave was one such place. She has not worked on another paranormal project since. The Bell property remains privately owned. The current owners decline interviews but reportedly experience no unusual activity. They run a small farming operation on part of the land and rent out portions for hunting. Whether the entity has finally moved on or simply gone quiet remains unknown. Some believe the curse exhausted itself, others think it waits for something, perhaps another Bell descendant to torment, or perhaps just the right conditions to appear fully once more. What transforms the Bell Witch from regional folklore into something more disturbing is the documented pattern of recurring events. Most ghost stories are static, repeating the same tale without evolution. But the Bell Witch accounts span 2 centuries and demonstrate adaptation. The entity, if it exists, has changed its methods while maintaining consistency in its apparent goals. It follows bloodlines. It knows private details it shouldn't. It inspires genuine fear in people who had no prior belief in the supernatural. The curse John Bell suffered and the promise of return have created a narrative that refuses to end. Each new generation of Bell descendants potentially faces the same strange events their ancestors endured. Each new resident of Robertson County who investigates the cave or the property risks encountering something. That may be ancient evil, leftover energy, or something else entirely. The hills of Tennessee keep their secrets well. The Red River flows past land where John Bell once farmed. The limestone caves still tunnel beneath the fields. Corn grows there now, straight and healthy, no longer twisted by whatever blight affected those first crops in 1817. The Bell House is long gone, its timbers scattered or rotted away, but the stories persist. The reports continue, and on quiet nights, some residents of Robertson County still claim to hear a woman's voice carried on the wind, singing hymns in the darkness, laughing at jokes only she understands. Whether curse or legend, whether supernatural entity or elaborate historical fiction, the Bell Witch has woven itself into the fabric of Tennessee folklore so completely that separating truth from myth becomes impossible. What remains certain is that John Bell died under mysterious circumstances, that his family fled their home, abandoning a wealthy farm, that descendants have reported strange events echoing the original occurrences, that the land itself carries a reputation strong enough to affect property values and tourism nearly 200 years later. The scratching in the walls continues somewhere. The voice still whispers to those who share Bell blood, and the question that haunted John Bell as he lay dying still has no answer. What did the Bells do to deserve this? What debt remains unpaid? And if the curse is real, will it ever truly end? If you found yourself unsettled by this tale, leave a comment telling us what you think really haunts Robertson County. And if you'd like to hear more stories of curses that refuse to die, subscribe and turn on notifications. Something might be listening to see who's interested.